the application process, how your eligibility for financial aid is determined. I'll briefly touch on student loans, outside scholarships, and then just some questions that you should ask the financial aid department at your student's institution. So just to start, different types of financial aid. One of the bigger misconceptions is that financial aid means free money, and it doesn't. It means money that is offered to the student to help assist with the cost of college. So when you get an award letter, you'll see several line items, and at the bottom it will say total financial aid. That total financial aid is not always free money. So I'm just going to go through, define a little bit of what you'll see on your award package. So grants and scholarships, these terms are often used interchangeably, but this is the free money that's offered to your student. Sometimes it's called gift aid, but it's money that's there to help with the cost of education that your student does not need to repay. So this is that free financial aid that most people think of. Work study is a program where your student has the opportunity to work on campus, and they receive a bi-weekly paycheck for the hours that they work. So for example, if your award package says work study $2,000, that means that over the course of the year, your student has the opportunity to earn $2,000, paid incrementally as they work. So work study does not come off of your bill, and that's the really key part. It's a great program because it allows students to start to build a resume for when they need internships. It helps get them acclimated to campus, meet people outside of their classes, but it's not an immediate cost deduction. So it's a grant, and your student can earn up to that amount, and that is paid in those small increments as they work. So it's not an immediate cost benefit. The program has its benefits, but don't think when you see that on an award package, okay, I've just reduced my out-of-pocket cost. And then loans. If you fill out the federal forms that I'll talk about in a minute, every student will be eligible for federal Stafford loans. And some of them could be subsidized, meaning the interest does not accrue until your student graduates. And some of it may be unsubsidized, meaning the interest starts to accrue right away. There's no payment due on either loan while your student is in school, but the interest is accruing. So when you get your award, you'll see all different line items on there. And then at the bottom, that total financial aid is made up of these 4 types of aid that exist. And so it's important that you go through, break it down a little further, see what is actually free that the school is offering, what is earned, and what is repaid. Part of the difficult process with financial aid, and the reason it can seem so cumbersome, is that although most schools will require the same forms, they will all have different deadlines and just different pieces that they want submitted with those forms. So what I would recommend doing is going to each school's website that your student is interested in, go to the financial aid section and write down the applications that the school is looking for, and then the corresponding deadlines. Some schools may have a February 1st deadline, others may have February 15th, some may have March 1st. You want to make sure that you get everything in by that school's deadline. So go ahead and check on that, and we recommend submitting everything 2 weeks early. When you do this, it gives the school time to get back to you to say, you know what, this looks incomplete, or we need some follow-up information with this. And it gives you time as you go through the form to realize you don't know the answer to all of the questions that it's asking. So you have enough of a buffer room there to go ahead and find that information out and submit the form. So give yourself plenty of time with these financial aid applications. These are the 3 things to look out for. So the first is that federal application. The FAFSA is for federal and state financial aid. Some schools will use this to determine their own institutional funding, how they'll award that as well. So this may be the only form that some schools ask for. Every school will ask for this at least, just for any type of federal aid or their own. The CSS Profile is from the College Board, and this is used primarily by private colleges. And this is how they decide how they're going to award their own institutional funding. So they will require, along with this, the FAFSA as well, so you can get your federal aid, but they will require a separate form. Every school's website, again, will list if they require the CSS profile, but College Board also has a list of schools that require it for you too, so you can take a look there just to double check. And then some schools will go a step further, and they will have institution-specific applications. And so that means after you do a federal form, after you possibly even do a CSS profile, they'll want you to submit another form that you will only send to that school. Oftentimes this is specific for academic awards, but you do want to check with each institution to find out if there's anything they're requiring that you will send only to that school. So just be aware, some schools put those types of restrictions on their financial aid. So has anyone gone through the financial aid process before that's in here? Okay, so if you've been through this before, you might remember that at one point you had a federal PIN number you used to sign federal documents. As of this past year, the government has switched all of that over to what is called an FSA ID, so a Federal Student Aid ID. At least one parent and the student need their own individual FSA ID. The reason being, when you fill these forms out, you're filling them out online, and the government wants to verify that you are who you say you are when you're completing these. So this will be your secure signature as an online signature, so you can submit everything electronically with the government. If you have or get an FSA ID for yourself now, and you have more than one student in school, as a parent, that's specific to you. So you only need one. You can use that to sign multiple applications for your students, and then your students need their own individual one as well. So just make sure that each of you, at least one parent and the student, obtain this. You can get this now. Just check this off your list, have it done. It can take the government up to 3 days to issue this to you. They run all the information through the Social Security Administration, so if there's any type of a hang-up there, it can take a little while. So make sure that you do apply for this before the deadline. You don't want to go looking to get this the night before a school requires the FAFSA, but then you can't submit this. So the website is on here that you go to, fsaid.ed.gov, and then get one for yourself, your student, and you'll be all set for January. So in January, the federal application is available. It is going to ask you for your 2015 tax information. We as institutions know that in January 2016, you do not have 2015 taxes done. But we need to give you an award package as quickly as possible. So it is completely fine to estimate on this form. It is much more critical with financial aid that you meet deadlines rather than waiting until April when your taxes are done. So use your 2014 return. If you know that 2015 was very different financially, that's not going to be suitable for you, wait until you get your W-2 and submit that in January. Use bank statements, any way that you can estimate, and make sure that you meet the school's deadline for filling this form out. If you are divorced or separated, this will be the custodial parent's information on this form. And it is one form per student. So if you have multiple students in college, you will do one for each of them, not one per family. This is something you'll submit every year to be eligible for federal aid as well. So double check, make sure that you have some financial documents that you can work off of so that you're prepared in January. And again, estimate if you can. It is much better to meet your school's deadlines. Once you submit the FAFSA, the government is going to send you in an email a student aid report. And this will have all of the information that you just submitted on the form. And it will also have if you've been selected for verification. So what you should first do is go through and just double check the information that you put on the form. Make sure the birthdays are correct, social security numbers, you didn't put the student's sibling's social security number. Sometimes we have parents that will put their parent income in the student section as well, and it duplicates that on the form. So just double check. If you see any errors, go through, see what you need to fix, and then make those updates online on the FAFSA as quickly as you can, so the school is using the most accurate information. And then you will see if you were selected for verification. Because this is a self-reporting form, the government will often select people to be verified, which means that they will ask the school to collect tax documents from you. And so the important thing with verification, your award package is not solidified until verification is complete, if you have been selected. So if you see that you are selected for verification, it is critical that you get your taxes done as quickly as possible, because you want to make sure that before your student commits to a school and enrolls there, you have a finalized award so the finances don't change on you over the summer. So make sure if you see that verification, you contact the schools and see what the government is requesting of you. The CSS Profile is available right now. Again, this is primarily just private colleges. If anyone has a student that is applying early decision anywhere, they may require this as well. This is something where it's also going to ask you for 2015 tax information. Again, we know you don't have that, so estimate. Same as the FAFSA, it's one per student, not one per family. And this is a little bit more comprehensive. So this form will basically ask for everything but your blood type. It will ask you everything you can imagine. So what I recommend with this is go in, start the application, save the form, and log out. Don't kill yourself with it. These forms are national, so they're not state specific. They may ask questions that are completely irrelevant to you, and it can be a process to get through all of them. So do a little bit, log out. Don't try to rush and do this all at one night. When you see if a school requires this form, try to get these done now, because you can. The FAFSA, you have to wait until January. So get these done now if you can, and then move on to the federal form so you're not so overwhelmed with that. Same as the federal form, it is the custodial parents' information. If you are divorced, some schools will require an additional non-custodial form. So when you go to each school's website and look at the applications they ask for, they'll list that there. But just be aware that there are some schools who will take that into account and look for some additional information. Once you submit these forms, then the school will send you an award package. And so to determine what you are eligible for, this is the formula. It's the cost of attendance minus your expected family contribution, which I'll go over. That is your financial need. So that is what you need in financial aid to make that school affordable. So the cost of education is made up of the direct cost, so the cost that you'll see on a billing statement, tuition, room and board if your student is on campus, but it also includes indirect cost. So it won't appear on your billing statement, but it's costs that you're going to incur for your student to attend that school. So books, if the school requires a laptop. If your student studies in California, the flight to get to California is part of the cost of education. It's everything that you have to spend to get your student an education at that school. So when you see on a school's website or they mention what their cost is, ask them what their overall total cost is. You want to look beyond just the tuition costs and make sure you're accounting for the fact that there may be fees or other things that come up throughout the year that you're not aware of. So make sure you know going all in, what do they estimate everything to be out of pocket for this year. The expected family contribution, this will come from the FAFSA, and it is what the government gives the school. So when you fill out the federal forms, that FAFSA form is going to ask you for income and assets. It does not take into account debt. The government will ask you for your family size and the number of students in school, and from that, they will create their own idea of a debt based on your family size, of a normal cost of living. And so they'll balance that with your assets, balance that with your income, and say, here is what we believe you can afford over the course of a year for your student's education. Keep a couple things in mind. This is dictated to the school by the government, so there's not much leniency there. It's decided by the government, so of course there are a little bit of flaws with it, but the school doesn't have much control over it. So unless there's something like a job loss, a medical illness, a really significant change in your year-to-year income, it's a number that the school is going to be stuck working with. So definitely have a conversation if you get your expected family contribution and it seems a little bit too high. Talk to the school, make sure there wasn't a mistake on the form, but just know that they're limited in the scope of what they can do to manipulate that. So there are a couple of reasons why your award package at one school will be very different than another. Part of that is just funding. The money that one school has, another school does not necessarily have. So, for example, what Yale can offer students is different than what Sacred Heart can offer. We have different endowment sizes. The other reason is that your eligibility for financial aid will be very different, and part of that is because the cost of education is in that calculation of what you're eligible for. So you are eligible for much more in this situation at a private school versus a public school. The other key here is that your expected family contribution does not change. That is specific to you, and that will not change whether you are at a community college, a public, or a private school. The government takes what you put on the FAFSA and they say this is what we say you can pay no matter where you attend. So that's why your eligibility at some schools will be greater, because the cost of the school is involved in that calculation. So to fill that gap, when you have the cost of education and you take the expected family contribution, if you have a remainder there, that is what you are eligible for in financial aid, and it can be filled with two different types. So need-based financial aid means that when that calculation is performed, you have something left. You have a need for more funding to make the school affordable. Merit-based financial aid means that it doesn't matter if you make $1 million or $1. It matters that your student has earned this funding from something that they've done, whether it's athletics, academics. At Sacred Heart, if you're in the band, we give you a grant. It doesn't matter what your need is, it matters that you participate in band. So those types of awards are merit-based. It matters that the student continues to participate in them or uphold a GPA, rather than that calculation where you have to have a need for it. The important part to think about with this, merit-based financial aid, the onus is on the student to keep that. So they maintain that GPA, they keep participating. It's easier to plan for 4 years because you know, as long as I make sure my student does X, Y, and Z, this money will be there. Need-based financial aid is dependent on you having a need in that calculation. Part of that calculation is your expected family contribution, which is determined again by your income and your assets. So if you have a really good year at work, if you get a bonus, if you work a little bit longer and get overtime, your income goes up, and so therefore your expected family contribution will go up. When that goes up, your need goes down. So year to year, your need-based aid can fluctuate because you may work harder, but the school then will reduce the need-based funding because you don't qualify for it anymore. Now that your expected family contribution has gone up, after that calculation happens, you don't have as much need, so they'll reduce your grant. So need-based aid fluctuates, and merit-based aid, as long as the student meets the standards that are set by the school, then it can be renewed. And that's that really important distinction that when you get an award package from a school, you have to look further and say, how are you classifying this and what can change from year to year? So just an example of some financial aid awards. The school will start with that expected family contribution, $10,000, so you have a $24,000 need. The government will offer all students that $5,500 federal loan, and then work study of $1,500. The work study amount can fluctuate, but we'll say $1,500. The school then comes in and they offer your student a $17,000 grant. In this example, you have $24,000 worth of financial aid. So in this example, your need has been met through financial aid. But this is why it's important to go through and break down that award package. Yes, your award package at the bottom will say total financial aid $24,000, but $17,000 is really free. $5,500 is repaid, and $1,500 is what your student can earn throughout the year. So although this is an award that meets your need, it is not doing it with just free financial aid. And so that's why it's really important that you break down your award and see what the school is offering you. Just because they may have met your need, it doesn't mean that they met your need with grants and scholarships. The other part of what can happen often, you have the same expected family contribution, the government will offer the same awards, but the school's funding is limited and they can only offer you a $13,000 grant. So that means that you have a $4,000 unmet need. So in this situation, in the government's eyes, your expected family contribution is still $10,000. That never changes. But the school cannot offer you enough money to get you to that full financial aid package. And so you are left with a greater out-of-pocket cost than you were supposed to have. And this happens more often than a lot of people realize. There are times when I'll meet with families in July, they'll have committed to the school in May, and they'll say, well, I saw my expected family contribution, I knew there was a way I could make it happen, so I didn't really read the award package. Ideally, that would work, but in many situations, the school does not have the funding to give you all of the money that you qualify for. So even if the government says an EFC that you know is financially manageable for you, you still may have a greater out-of-pocket cost if the school cannot offer you enough financial aid. So it's really important that you read all these awards in detail to try to determine what the school is going to offer you. The reverse of that is a question that I always get asked. So just for comparison purposes, that full need met package on the other side, but can you pay less than that expected family contribution? And this is when that merit-based financial aid comes in. So you have athletic, and you can change that with any type of participation grant, and academics, and then your actual cost would be $7,000. So in the government's eyes, your expected family contribution is still $10,000. That never changes. But the school has given you money based on something that the student has done, based on the talent that the student has, whether it's academics or athletics or participating in some way, so that they have earned enough money that they have reduced your cost beyond your expected family contribution. It's not typical. You're not going to see this on every award you get, but this is why it's important to distinguish that merit versus need-based financial aid. So you know how much you can keep trying to apply for, how much your student can keep looking to participate at that institution so you can get as much as possible to reduce your cost. So the net price calculator, is anyone in here the parent of a junior underclassman as well, or just seniors? Okay, good. So this is definitely good for seniors. A lot of them probably have their hearts set on schools already, so definitely underclassmen as well. The net price calculator is available on every school's website, so every school-specific website. If you go there, and every school will have a search box, just type net price calculator, and this will come up. What this does is it gives you a mock financial aid package. So it takes about 10 minutes to answer. It's only as good as the information that you put in, so if you have some type of financial document to estimate off of, that would be helpful, but it's certainly not required. And it will give you what the school would typically award a student with your finances. Some schools will ask for academic information to try to go through and get you an academic scholarship estimate. Some will go through and ask about participation type grants. So about 10 minutes to complete, but it's a very good guide. So it's not a guarantee that that's what your student would get, but it's a very good way to help determine what schools are going to be financially affordable. One of the bigger misconceptions is that every private school has a huge endowment, and that's not true. And so one way to help decide where should you allow your student to become emotionally invested before you know how much it's going to cost is by using this. So before you get an award package, whether you're a senior parent or not, go ahead and complete this. So you have an idea when you have accepted students days, where do we want to go? Where do I want to keep encouraging my student to go look and visit? And where should we say this is a financial reach school? Certainly apply, but no, it may not be something that we can obtain. So student loans. The only loans that a student can get without a cosigner are federal Stafford loans. And those will come in an award package if you fill out the FAFSA. The maximum that a freshman can get is $5,500. So regardless of the cost of that school, that is the most that the government will let a freshman student borrow without a cosigner. And that's actually why I put this slide in here. In a lot of years I didn't go over student loans, but it's important. As of about 2008, 2009, students started to need a cosigner for everything. And so when you commit to a school, even if your student says, I'll borrow, I don't care, you then have to say, well, I care, because someone is going to have to be on the hook for that loan with them. So just those Stafford loans, so long as at 17 they haven't defaulted, I hope they're all in good standing, but that would be the only caveat with this, then they'll get that $5,500. Beyond that, there are private loans, which are in the student's name with a cosigner, and then there's a parent loan, and the parent loan is from the government, solely in a parent's name for all of the student's costs. It never goes into the student's name in repayment. It's always in the parent's name. So just be aware when you're looking at schools, even if your student is going to take on a student loan, they need someone attached to that. And you don't want to think just about the freshman year, think all 4 years, and then think about their siblings. If you have younger students coming through, how much that will affect them as well. I would highly recommend using a loan repayment calculator. You can use the web address on the bottom of the presentation. You can Google them. Just sit down with your student and realize that this is going to be a lot to repay the more that they continue to borrow. So, and think beyond that freshman year. Again, think for the 4 years. If you're okay with $10,000 now, are you okay with $40,000 at graduation? If they're looking at a program that requires a graduate degree, how much is that going to cost? And try to figure out, what are you going to have to pay when you graduate? One thing I would highly suggest that everyone does is sit down and decide, what are you comfortable with co-signing? What are you comfortable with allowing your student to borrow in a student loan? It's important that you do this now. The closer that you get to May 1st, which is the national deadline, the closer that you are there, the more exhausted you become, the more emotionally drained that you get, the more at risk you are to make a financial decision just to satisfy your student, and then 6 months realize this is not affordable. So you need to decide now, while you have somewhat of a clear mind, what are we okay to co-sign, if anything? And that way, when you get the award packages from the school, you can say, okay, the school got us to where we need to be. This is feasible, you can attend here. Or you can say, no, we had this discussion, we made this decision, here's what's affordable for us, the school's nowhere near here, we can't do this. You don't want to get to graduation day and feel blindsided or feel overwhelmed or feel like you should not have made that decision. So the earlier that you can come to a decision on what you're willing to allow your student to take on, what you're willing to take on yourself, if anything, again, you don't have to. Just be prepared so that come March, when you get awards, it's a lot easier. You remove the emotion from the decision and you have some logic in there. So outside scholarships are scholarships that can help with the cost of education, and they come from places that are not the federal or state government or the institution that your student is attending. So Elks clubs, Rotary clubs, local organizations. I would recommend making a separate email account for when your student applies for all of these. It can be daunting, the amount of emails that you, and they're important that they at least get some degree of your attention. So you don't want to automatically delete them because they're clogging up your inbox, or have your student ignore them. So have a separate account so when you're ready and you have the time to look at these applications, you can go in there. The smaller the scholarship and the more local the scholarship, typically the more worth your time it is to fill out, because you're just competing with less people. So start with the local scholarships and then move outward, and then look at state-based scholarships. Ones that are national are great, but if they're very general, it's not necessarily worth your students' time to be writing an essay for those when they can focus on local ones. They're competing with less people. So check with any local organizations. I believe the high school guidance office gets them as well. Certainly worth your students' time to apply for these awards. One thing just to realize is that when you get this, let's say we went back to that example where your expected family contribution was $10,000 and the school gave you a $17,000 grant. So your need was met through financial aid. When you get an outside award, what the school should do first is reduce the loans, reduce your loan debt. But let's say in that $17,000 example, the school said, we will give you a grant of $24,000. We'll meet your need in full with a grant. And now you win an outside scholarship. Many schools will reduce that award. Let's say you won $4,000. They would reduce that award down to $20,000 to make room for the $4,000 award you just received. Because with need-based financial aid, you can only get enough to be up to your need and up to that expected family contribution. So when you have an award from a school, ask them and say, my student is actively applying for these outside resources. How is that going to affect their financial aid package? Make sure you find out, are they taking money away that they've already offered? Is that just negating the award and what they've won outside? How does the school apply those? So that way, when you go through and you commit to the school, you know what award you have. A lot of organizations don't give out these outside awards until until June. So you will have committed to a school already. So you want to understand if the institution will reduce their own package. And
just want to clarify what I need.
so questions just to ask the office, don't assume. That first one is, how do those outside awards affect the aid package? What's going on there? Will they reduce their own money? Will they try to work that for your benefit? What is the school's policy on non-custodial parents? You want to know if there's additional documentation that you need to be prepared for. What is the average student debt level at the school? But balance that with the job placement rate. You don't want a school that is just continuously indebting students, but you want a school that also places students in a job in their graduate degree programs. So try to find one that's a fit, that the investment you feel is worth it. What scholarships and grants are renewable each year? It's not typical, but there are schools that have great freshman grants, but they're only for freshmen, so just make sure you clarify that. And then how can the awards change in future years? So really getting to the heart of that need-based versus merit-based aid. If your EFC fluctuates, you don't want to lose financial aid going forward, so just being prepared, what can change and what is going to stay there. And then what happens if your financial circumstances change? So if in your student's junior year you lose your job, someone becomes ill and they can't work, is the school willing to work with you and try to help you find additional financial aid so your student does not have to leave the institution? The final slide on here is just some helpful websites. If you are selected for verification by the government, that IRS website is going to be where you'll go to get some information for the school. Studentloans.gov has some good information about those federal Stafford loans as well as the Parent Plus loan. NASFA is a professional organization for financial aid, but it has really good consumer tips on there for parents and students. And then the U.S. Department of Ed and the state of Connecticut. So these are just reliable resources. It's hard going through this process because when you Google something, you don't know if the information is accurate. And these are resources where you can get some accurate information when you're looking. So if there are any general questions that anyone's okay asking with an audience, I'm happy to take those now. How does it work when your students are applying for college and the application for admissions is due, let's say December 1st, but your financial aid is not due until in January? The majority of schools are what's called need blind. So that means that they will admit students based on the common application and their performance in high school without looking at their financial information. If they're admissible, they will admit them. So that's often very separate. If your school requires admissions documents, make sure you meet those schools' deadlines of December. But financial aid is totally irrelevant to almost all schools' decisions on admitting a student. So it's just two different offices. They have later deadlines in financial aid if possible to give you a little bit of breathing room to get those forms in, but they're not, the financial aid information is typically not being used when a student is admitted. Right, so early decision, just to follow up on that. The only people that I ever recommend early decision for are students that are applying to a school that is so competitive and it's such an Ivy League institution that if you don't apply early decision, you won't be admitted to that program. It's just very specific. For the majority of students, there is no need to apply early decision. If you're an athlete and you're assigning an NLI, which is a National Letter of Intent, already committing you to the school in November, sure, you've already committed, apply early decision. But when you apply early decision, you take away the ability to look at other financial aid award packages from other schools. Knowing that you're admitted a month and a half earlier is not worth the financial risk that that puts you in. So unless there's an absolute compelling reason, early decision is not always the best choice for most people. So how do they take into account if you have more than one in college? So if you have one in college and your expected family contribution, let's say it's $10,000. Now you have two in college, it's $5,000 for each. So they split that in half. So your eligibility for financial aid increases with two in school. If you have twins going through at the same time, you'll have two in college the whole time, and that works out well. If you have one in school now and one that follows your student, that second student's entering college with two in school, meaning their financial aid eligibility is going to be significant. When that first student graduates, your expected family contribution goes back to that $10,000. And so if that second student of yours had a really good need-based financial aid award, once one student leaves and now you're back to having just one in college, your eligibility for aid will decrease and that student may lose a lot of their awards. So you just want to check when you have multiple students in school, once one graduates, how is it going to affect the other's award package now that that EFC is no longer split in half or thirds? So with those loans are the parent loans deferred. The interest on the parent loan starts to accrue right away, just like an unsubsidized Stafford loan. But you can defer payment on those until the student graduates. Relatively new, they do allow, it used to be that you had to pay the interest while the student was in school, but you can defer all payment. Is the interest higher for the parent loan versus the Stafford? It is. It's typically about 2% higher. Every July 1st is when Congress has the ability to, they have to decide what that interest rate is by then. So the school will let you know going forward if Congress has changed any of that. But it is definitely higher.